Dr. Conway, very nice to have you. Thank you for accepting our invitation to be our guest speaker to that at AI and Human Connection. Today, Dr. Conway is going to talk to us about AI in higher education. Before we start, I'd like to say a few words about him. Dr. Conway, he is a professor, AI futurist, and innovator. He's a program coordinator. He is also working with Regulatory Affairs at School of Advanced Technology at Algonquin College in Ontario, Canada. Dr. Conway, thank you so much for being here, and we will look forward to our discussion today.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Ali. I very much appreciate it. I think we can have a very good discussion today. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
They're tasks that you have to do repeatedly, whether it's completing reports or doing communication with your senior management, whatever the case may be, and also a lot of administrative tasks with students, distributing their grades, commenting on their papers, all of these kinds of things. And a lot of those can be routinized through AI. And so this leads, Ali, I'm sure you've heard this leads to a common fear. Is it going to replace my job? Is it going to create problems for me? And the first thing that I have to do when I talk to faculty and you speak to faculty meetings is that, what AI will allow you to do because of its efficiency qualities is it will allow you to focus on the higher order assistance that you can give to students. I call that the empathy ladder, right? And I call that, it allows you to move up the empathy ladder to give your students more personalized care and treatment because you're spending less time on these routine tasks. And this is not a mythical thing, that this is real. I've been doing it now for 2 years. It's something that my students really appreciate because suddenly, wow, I mean, he has time to take a Zoom call from me. I mean, before Dr. Conway used to be so busy, it'd be tough to get a hold of him, but now they can do that. And so it's efficiency to routinize tasks that don't require human oversight. And I'm sure we can talk about these ethical issues later, but that move the teacher up the ladder, what I call the empathy ladder, which is to be able to pay more personal attention to the student.
Yes, if you allow me to jump in right there, thank you for your emphasis on empathy, because I am a healthcare chaplain. So that's what we talk about, AI in healthcare too. So doctor or any healthcare professional now will have more time for the patient instead of taking notes while talking to the patient, right? And you're probably don't have time to look and really listen. Now you'll be able to really focus on the patient while an AI environmental listening tool is taking all the notes. So it is, as you said, it is going to hopefully allow more empathy, more personal time with the patient. So that sounds very similar in education. That's what I hear.
Yeah, I agree. It would be highly similar because my regulatory affairs work is actually in public health and the environment. So we see this all the time. And when we talk to doctors and nurses, we hear this all the time, but also to mental health workers and others. And that's really important. The second major issue is the personalized learning paths. AI allows us to do personalized learning paths like we were never able to do before because it was simply physically, humanly impossible to do it. I mean, there just isn't enough time, isn't enough energy to be able to do it. For example, in my program, I have 190 graduate students, okay?
That's a lot, yeah.
That's a lot of graduate students. And needless to say, they all want some of my attention, like some of my thoughts on their research papers, their capstone projects, and those kinds of things. And before it was almost impossible to do that, but now the way I've trained a model, I can run their papers through a model and get personalized advice as to how to make the paper better. And some people might think, oh, he's just using AI to do this. No. Okay. This requires a lot of preparation with the AI, right? The AI gets trained on your grading rubric, on your guidance to your students, on calibrating with background papers, like telling the AI that this is an A paper, this is a B paper, this is a C paper.
Yes.
So there's a lot of work that goes into it. But once you've done it, then instead of, the way we do, I don't know if your audience knows what rubrics are, but rubrics are basically, ways that we grade across a matrix. And those rubrics are shown to the student at the start. The old way of doing things, of course, is you sign the paper, the student works, contributes, submits the paper, and we grade it against the rubric. Well, by then, of course, all the mistakes have already been made, right?
Yeah.
The student hasn't learned yet. So rather than that, we can personalize that path. So in other words, now what I do is I get them to submit at point A, I get them to submit at point B, I get them to submit at the final product. And that way I can correct their mistakes or improve their product in a phased manner, so that the end product is not a result of some things being done, but other things being done wrong, and it's a B paper. No, some things being done wrong, fix some of them, some things being done wrong, fix some of them, some things being done right, and then the final product is an A paper, right? Which ultimately is what we want to do, right? We want to make students better.
Exactly. That sounds great for, I think, any of our listeners who is a college student, to know that now they're going to be getting that kind of help at every step. And so, which is going to also increase their grades too.
Yeah, and it's going to make them more ready for the workforce, and well, in many ways, more ready for life, because then they remember, oh, I got to spend more time with my professor, and I got to, that's back to the empathy ladder, right? And what we don't realize sometimes is this means a lot to the students, right? I mean, if I can sit down with them for 15 minutes and give them personalized advice, that's a big deal to them, right? I mean,
of course.
It's just another part of the process, but to them it's pretty important. And we have to, AI allows us to get in better touch with that empathy dimension.
Exactly. Would you please say a few more words on the algorithm, the model you're using? Because I understand that a lot of places would use a huge large language model, and then they train that large language model on a very specific area. Let's say for us it is spiritual care, for somebody else it is something different. So you are using a large language model, but you're connected to your specific questions, so that AI is now becoming more specialized in that specific area, kind of thing. Or this is a like a built model from zero?
Well, there's two approaches to take. I mean, one of the things that I'm working on right now is gathering the contributions, financial contributions, and so on, to develop a dedicated model for my program, which will be trained on my field entirely. Okay, but until that happens, I've been using large language models, but I've been training Windows to do that. But I have a special technique, and that technique is what I call the multi LLM iterative prompting methodology, and you'll see that paper on my LinkedIn page. And it basically corrects for bias and errors by having the 4 different LLMs perform the same function. So that's the way I've got it set up. So it's pretty sophisticated. I mean, I would need time to explain it to people, but essentially what I'm trying to do when I do that is eliminate, because individual large language models will have different capacities and different biases.
Yes,
okay,
for sure.
Yeah, and because I don't know how much your constituency knows about this, but probably do, but I mean, basically large language models are constructed through data training and through algorithm design.
Yes.
Okay, so you can have an error factor in the data that the LLM is trained on, or an error factor in the algorithm that the LLM uses in the case of your prompt. Okay. And so the way to mitigate that is either by heavy human oversight or by applying my MIPM methodology, which was to look at it through the eyes of 4 different large language models to compensate for any bias. And then what I do as a human is I interpret the deviation of scores.
Yes, yes.
And so that my students know they're getting human oversight in the end. So for example, let's say ChatGPT said this paper is a 85 out of 100. And Claude said that it was a 75 out of 100. Then I would say, okay, I got to explain that deviation. And so then I will ask the LLMs to explain their decision. And then if one LLM is out of whack because their explanation reveals that, then I will correct the LLM, or what I call calibrate the LLM for the next paper. So if there's a substantial deviation, I will zero in on it. If it's a 1 or 2 percentage point deviation, it's, let me tell you, we've done studies, right? I mean, you take 4 humans to grade the paper, and there's a lot more than 3 or 4 percentage points.
Yes, of course, yeah.
LLMs make a deviation, but humans make even more, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I understand that eventually you're going to have a very well-developed algorithm model that you're using in education. Yeah. So is that, if the word is correct, is the enthusiasm you have, this professionalism, do you think it is also replicated in other higher education institutions, or people are still like hesitant about it?
Well, I think it's the biggest problem we have right now, Ali, in this whole area is the inconsistency in how things are being applied. I doubt that there are very many people that have kind of pushed the envelope as far as I have yet. Of course they will, right? I mean, ultimately, I hope they will.
I hope so too, yeah.
So, but there's probably very few people that have kind of developed this methodology that I use, because it's technically a little more intensive. It requires a bit more resources. Maybe the average school teacher won't have the resources to do that. That kind of stuff. But ultimately, we would like to see a situation where, in my program, where I have a model that is built on an open source model, but is really tailored. It's a dedicated model, and so that it's dedicated to my program, not to education. You already have companies that are doing sort of general education bots, right? I mean, like Boodlebox and a few others like that are doing sort of general education models, which are good places to go for teachers. But if you're into the more heavy sciences, more heavy research focus, you need to develop specialized tools for that.
I understand that. So you, as a professor and also AI futurist at the same time, you have this both wings, so to speak, to both sides. So let's take kind of let's have an imagination. How would a college class is going to look like in, I don't know, like 20, 30 years from now? I mean, do you think we're still going to have a lot of this face-to-face education while students are also, doing online education and using AI, or it is going to be something like completely different than what we have now?
It's going to be completely different, and it's not going to take 20 years. It's going to take 5 years. Right? I mean, already, I mean, the way we do things now, right, is that Professor Conway gets up in front of the class and lectures to the students and takes questions and answers. And that is going to disappear very quickly.
Wow.
What's going to happen is that professors will become sort of like facilitators of a learning process. and they will be there to organize the class. They will be there to you'll still have content, right, on your learning management system. You'll still have your papers and your typical static sources of information, but now you will be curating the learning process that students will have in collaboration with AI. And that's what will happen. And that's why if you look on some of my LinkedIn work, you'll see that I have prompt exercises. For example, if
Yes,
I want to
yes.
teach my students, let's say it's a controversial issue. Let's say the issue is, why are we still having problems providing fresh water to Indigenous communities in Northern Canada? Then I can get together with them and I say, okay, you are an industry group, you are a government group, you are an Indigenous community group, even if they're not Indigenous. I want them to play that role. And you are something else. And they each have an AI, and they interact with the AI to build their arguments. And then they share each other's AI outputs, and they sort of keep doing that until they begin to congeal in the middle. They begin to kind of
Yes.
say, well, this would be a position that we could actually advance because it would have constituency support. It would benefit the Indigenous communities. Industry wouldn't be arguing with government and vice versa. And so we can do live case scenarios right in the classroom. But then the role of the professor becomes, Professor, I don't really understand this point. That's when you expound. You said you give them for examples. For example, up on in the Chippewa River area, they this is the problem they had, and blah 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 blah, and they then they learn from the professor that way. So it becomes a student, AI, professor triangle of learning is what I call
it. Yes.
And that is just way ahead of me standing up in the room and kind of telling them a bunch of things, lecturing for 45 minutes, which they have to remember as an abstract because they never lived it. But working with AI, it's almost like they're living it themselves, right? They're resolving it themselves. And of course, human species always learn better from experience, right? Than from just hearing it from others.
Yes. So thank you. So let's say for I think any professor who does this traditional way of teaching, I think this is probably a lot to hear, right?
Yes.
So, and you're saying that this is going to actually happen much faster than we would expect. So for any college professor, like, do you see, my question has two parts. First, do you see kind of a pushback with which actually happens with anything presented new into society? So do you feel that kind of pushback from faculty? And then the second thing is how a professor can be prepared for that kind of teaching.
Yeah, I pushback is human nature, right? I mean, this is normal. If there's one thing that we know as human beings is that change is unsettling, and we're routine animals, we're community animals. So if the community gets disrupted, our routine gets disrupted, we're unsettled. We feel uncomfortable with that. Some people more so than others, right? And a lot of academic institutions are pretty conservative institutions, right? Despite the claim that there's a lot of sort of liberal, progressive, or some would even say radical presence in these institutions. The truth of the matter is that these tend to be relatively conservative institutions, not in terms of their political views. By that, I don't mean that. This is not that kind of discussion, but it's pretty staid, right? It's pretty set in its ways. And so yeah, you definitely get a couple of responses. I mean, those who will sort of deny AI as being all that important, it's going to be a flash in the pan, which I've written on that too, and it won't be, trust me, okay? It won't be, because there's just too many efficiencies. There's just too many good things that can come out of it. And the second thing is that, the only way to overcome that is you need to develop the systems to overcome it. You need develop the tools of thinking, the philosophical tools. That's why some of my writings are on the philosophy of AI integration and some of the tools like the doubt first principle and the AI use transparency forms, very practical things. And then the next thing that has to happen is faculty training. I mean, they have to be trained. I mean, you can't, I mean, countless hours I've spent to get where I am with AI. You can't expect every professor who's got a full-time job, 2 kids at home, other commitments to their community or church or whatever, and then you expect them to devote the time that I've devoted, right? So there needs to be good training programs put in place, right? And that's going to be what needs to happen. And it needs to happen at the program level. I mean, you need to make sure that if you have a program like my area where there's 12 different courses, there has to be consistency in how AI is used throughout. You can't have inconsistencies because it's completely wrong for the students. Like one student is afraid to submit a paper to this professor, but this professor is very open about AI, and it's all over the place, and that's a big stumbling block that a lot of institutions will have because they'll fail to do it systematically in terms of their strategic plan, and they'll do it piecemeal, and that will be lots of trouble. And that's when harm can come from AI, right?
Yeah,
we haven't talked about the harms yet, but that's when harm can come from AI.
It's like, yeah, sorry, go.
No, go ahead, Ali. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's like similar to when first this charting system was also asked from chaplains to write chart notes. We also had this kind of historically this pushback. It's like, I go into the room, I do my ministry, I go out, and it cannot be written. What I had over there cannot be written. But now there's so much also push to make spiritual care as part of a standardized healthcare profession, right? So they say, well, you guys do these things, but how do you measure the outcome? I mean, you visit a patient, what was the outcome? Did patient like verbalize his fears or concerns or identify his or her religious resources? Or I visited and patient thanked me. Well, that's not an outcome, right? So there was a lot of pushback from some chaplains to say, well, I'm not kind of going to do that. I'm not very willing to do that. But we came a long way. We did a lot of strides. So I kind of identified that there's pushback. So that's one of the reasons that now there's a big movement in the country to make chaplains education more standardized, and there are trainings for it. And as you mentioned about faculty training, so are there already trainings taking place? I kind of imagine that you're doing trainings for faculty. Would you please say a few words about that?
Yeah, well, what I did was, maybe the best way to tell this story is waking up one morning and realizing that I teach in regulatory affairs, and AI is already heavily entrenched in regulatory affairs in the real world, in the marketplace. And so what am I going to do? Because this is big. I mean, this is a big transition. So the first thing I did was just start reading voraciously on what was going on out there, taking out as many large language model subscriptions as I could, start playing with it, figuring it out. Then I said, okay, well, what I need to do is I need to develop some basic principles so that my students will understand, because the literature is all over the place, right? It's just too confusing to communicate. So the first thing I did was look at everything and said, what am I really saying here when I say to the students? And I'm saying to them that doubt everything that the AI produces first. So I came up with what we call the doubt first principle. And it basically requires that my students check the factual accuracy of AI output, check the ethical appropriateness of the AI output, and check the contextualization of the AI output. In other words, that it's not going to be harmful to any particular groups or whatever the case may be, and that it fits the subject matter. And so we developed the doubt first principle, and that principle is now applied. I mean, it's applied and at the college. And so we do that. And then the next thing I did was I said, well, when we do research, you can't reference research. Static references are different than working collaboratively with AI. So you can't really reference a paper the way when you're using AI, the way you are when you're using static sources like journals and books and articles,
Yeah.
which of course are entitled to be referenced, obviously. So now what do we do, right? So, we talk a lot with the disciplinary unit at the college to say we have to move away from punitive approaches. We have to move to more of a process concept where we know the students are going to use AI. So what we really need to understand is how they used it rather than whether they used it. So that we developed basically this idea of understanding the process within which they use AI. And we gave them transparency forms to record that process. And so that's how we got to this point, right? Where we're now sort of openly saying that we know you're going to use AI. So what we want you to do is become really good at it.
Yeah.
But always stay in charge of the AI, not the other way around. And we then develop prompt exercises for that and so on.
Yeah, I mean, that doubt first, I think, is very important. I mean, I covered the topic of, AI hallucinations a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
And, there are a lot of actually problems with that. One of the a couple of lawyers actually are facing, some charges because AI prepared the document and then mentioned some cases which were totally fabricated. There were no cases like that. So I think that, doubting first and then, okay, I got this information, but let me kind of cross-check with other things and see how accurate it is. So you switching from kind of AI benefits in higher education to these kind of also like risks that we can have, like misinformation and things like that. What might be some of the ethical considerations, ethical concerns from your perspective that could, kind of jeopardize this process while using AI in higher education?
Yeah, this is a difficult question to answer, but not because of the ethics, but because of the multiple relationships that are involved. Let me explain. Ethics to a degree are responses to what a technology can do, right? I mean, and so as the technology evolves, there needs to be a certain amount of ethical fluidity, but one that keeps the core principles of ethics. Do no harm, be fair. Some of the core principles of ethics have to stay there. But obviously, the ethics around how you take care of a horse, as opposed to the ethics of how AI technology can be used in assessing applications to your college, or how AI can be used in doing research. Each of them presents unique kind of ethical considerations, right? Where the core principles need to be applied. Obviously, it's always, do no harm, fairness, these kinds of core principles are all there. We all basically intuitively, we know what they are. And so, but how we fashion what we call ethics for each particular each particular technology and each particular use is going to vary somewhat. And why is that important? Because what you need to check consistent with the doubt first principle becomes prioritized in different ways, right? So if you're using AI in the application process for your college, what do you have to check? You have to check that the AI is not favoring particular racial groups or ethnic groups or language groups, or particular types of names, so you're always doing ethical audits of these systems. Okay. In research, you're always checking for various biases because LLMs will always produce some kind of bias. And so that's why I came up with the MIPM approach to deal with that. I also have a paper called, Biases Creative Tension. And it looks at how you can look at the biases of LLMs to explain a lot in society and explain a lot in racial or religious relationships or so on, and how are beliefs contributing negatively or positively to these relationships. So you can get a lot from bias as well, but you have to defend against bias, right?
Yes.
You have to defend against inaccuracy, hallucinations. And
Mhm.
so these can be very harmful things. These are not just, sort of things in passing, right? These are not,
Mhm.
so what if it just did that? No, I mean it can have a significant impact on the wider student body and on the community at large
Mhm.
if historical biases are perpetuated, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
And that's what we don't want. Obviously, in institutions of higher education, that's what we
Yeah.
don't have
Yeah.
happen. Yeah,
Yeah, we don't want it to perpetuate. Exactly. Yeah.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
when internet came out, one of the big things was that people were saying this is going to help world to be, more democratization. And then, we can discuss all that. That's a different topic. But I know one of your papers talk about how AI could help democratization in AI education, I mean, in higher education. Would you please elaborate more on that, how AI could help with the democratization in higher education?
Yeah, I mean, there's actually, yeah, you what you state is correct, but there's really the paradox that I'm dealing with in my work is that it can take one of two forks in the road. One of those forks is to because it is a tool that could really facilitate democratization to reach
Yes.
students that previously were not reached because of their learning capacities or their learning or cultural characteristics within a given site, or democratize learning across vast distances. Providing exposure to students that say that live in our Northwest Territories, where they can now use AI to see what the city is like, what to watch out for, why does the city have problems, what these things that they could never do before. So
Hmm.
democratizes information across space and time, basically. That's
Hmm.
what that's what AI can readily do. It's a very powerful benefit of AI. But on the other hand, AI is also a tool, and tools cost money, right?
Hmm. Hmm. Oh
Tools are
yeah.
expensive, and and so you can take one fork of the road, what I would call the positive one, if you remember to be tackling the digital divide the whole time.
Mm.
Uh, if you're going to take the other fork in the road if you um, begin to to continue to just see it as big business, as profit making, as making it too expensive for the average person to afford. I did it wasn't an interview, but a talk with a professor from an American university. She just contacted me to say she's starting a tour to developing countries and she wants to introduce AI to these students. And what ended up taking up a lot of the conversation was this: um, how do I do this when it's so expensive? Like, how do I get, like, these are poor students. Like, how do I get access? Is the free version of X the
Uh-huh.
only way I can do? These are the types of problems I worry about. These are the types of issues that I worry about a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think somewhat similar to our concerns in healthcare too. On one hand, on one side, we see that AI is really can facilitate access to it. But I mean, access is always one of the biggest issues in healthcare. Okay, we offer all these wonderful services, top-notch technology and all that, but who has the access to it, right?
Mm.
And so on one side, we think that AI is going to really help a lot of people to access this type of healthcare. But on the other hand, maybe it is going to only favor the privileged ones. So it is, as you said, I think it's an ongoing concern in higher education. That's what I understand in a similar way that we have in healthcare too.
Much so.
Yeah,
Very much
yeah.
so.
So, one of our channel name is AI and Human Connection. So, uh, if we could talk a little bit about creativity, because um, you talk about creativity in one of your articles. If I remember well, the article's name was the death of a writer. So how, and you talk about how AI is actually changing our perceptions of cognition, our perception of creativity. So I wonder if you could say more on that, how AI is going to really affect our understanding of those two things.
Yeah, that provocative title was designed to be especially provocative because I
Yes.
want people to focus on the fact that our traditional notion of the writer, the writer sitting alone in front of their typewriter
Yeah.
with a cigar and a cognac on the side, and they're just geniuses creating this written work, as if it's all new, all unique, all only to their genius. And I mean that in the modern age, that's the writer that I'm saying is dying, and because we are now moving into a period where almost all information is community based, right? I mean, it's almost all out there. It's very unusual for anybody to come up with a completely brand new idea or concept.
Mm-hmm.
But what they might come up that's really unique is taking that idea or that concept and placing it in a different context that transfers knowledge to people in more useful ways, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's one aspect that's dying. The other thing that's going to die, and people can dispute it as much as they want, but it's going to happen because of efficiency, is the actual grunt work of actually writing. It's going to be less and less and less. And people think that's appalling because it takes away from human creativity. But actually, no. Just like AI will drive us up the empathy ladder in teaching, AI can drive us up the creative ladder in thinking, because
Mm-hmm.
the time that we would spend on doing grunt work, we if we're doing it right, we're using the AI as a foil to come up with new ideas, new insights. Geez, I never thought of it that way. I never thought of it that way. But that's a really interesting way. And then you can explore that. And so you're leading the AI up the creativity ladder, and you're leaving a little bit of grunt work behind to take the AI's taking notes or whatever. And then at the end, you pull it all together, right?
Yes.
With working with the AI in a collaborative way. So there's in that sort of that interaction between humans and AI, we're going to be lifted up in our creativity because we're simply going to be having more time and more energy to think creatively about concepts that we had previously settled in our mind as being just that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
As one thing that AI allows you to do is look at the same concept from 50 different angles and from 50 different persons' perspective. Huh?
Exactly.
Don't
Yeah,
forget, right?
exactly.
Like
Exactly.
I could set up like a concept that I've had in my head as being true about a particular culture, let's say. In my life, I guard against that, but let's say I had that, right? It would be interesting if I plugged it in and said, well, what would somebody from this culture, this society think about that issue, right? Wow, they look at it that way. They would look at
Mm-hmm.
they would
Mm-hmm.
look at it that way, wouldn't they?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so things that we were never able to do before, we can now do, and that just gives us more creativity tools. It's like a it's like a painter that was always getting bad canvases to paint on, but now somebody has delivered them the best canvases to paint on, right? And
Exactly.
now their art somehow is just taking a jump of improvement.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that, or like an athlete that always been training in an old beaten up track, that suddenly they get discovered and they're training in the best physical fitness facilities in the world.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to get better,
Mm-hmm.
obviously, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're
Mm-hmm.
gonna, and that's all AI is here, right? That's all it is.
Exactly. To
Yeah.
to to boost our, I think, human capacity. What you said kind of reminded me. There was a recent. I was watching a video, and the speaker talks about, for years and years we have this argument that in the ancient times, where writing was limited, where a lot of people were illiterate, so they had a very strong oral tradition, right? And that was kind of the argument that so their memories were very sharp. But now there are new findings, that's what I understood, and hopefully it is right, in memory science that says actually that with the introduction of writing, actually our memories got better. I mean, we remember more, not, I mean, we remember better in oral plus written tradition time than the oral tradition time only. That's very interesting, I mean, to me. So I think with the introduction of AI into our memories, our lives, I think we're going to have even more. It's going to boost our creativity in other levels too. Yeah, it just reminded me of that. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And you have the additional advantage of what you're saying in the fact that AI now turns static material into things that you can actually, um, mimic in scenarios.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the human mind always learns best when it imprints through actual life experience or having to write something, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
My students, I tell them, I make you write a lot because what you write, you will remember. If I just tell you something and you hear it in one ear and out the other, that's exactly what's going to happen. And
Exactly.
so I insist on a lot of writing. And so that's because of essentially the way the human mind imprints, and
Exactly. Yeah.
it's best. Yeah.
Yeah, it's also similar to, I think, let's say sometime at night you have so much going on in your mind and you cannot sleep, probably a couple of hours. Then you just, stand up, grab a notebook and start writing. And sometimes before you get to the middle of the page, your mind is already clear. I mean, that writing has so much power
Yes.
in expressing. That's one of the things that we use with our patients too, journaling, right? Writing about your emotions instead of going all that through your mind. If you feel up to it, that you can keep a journal and write, this is how I feel today, this is what's going on, and then suddenly that burden is really kind of much lighter than it was. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good technique. Also, a good technique with our modern cell phones is that if you're not sleeping, what's on your mind, just get up and say it into your cell phone, record it.
Yeah.
Okay, I've got it. Okay, now I practice. You know,
Yes,
it,
exactly.
human mind is like that, right?
Yes,
That there's something on it, you got to get it off. And when you're
exactly.
as a writing, I sometimes use my cell phone in that way. And then you're calmer. You just say,
Mm-hmm.
okay, somehow I've verbalized this or I've written it down. And so those channels are now clear and I can be more peaceful until the morning. Yeah,
Ex
yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah. Before we close our session, I wonder if there's anything that you would like to add for our viewers to know, anything you might want to add before we close the session?
Yeah, just that AI is here to stay. It's not going anywhere. So what we have to do is figure out how to use that technology for the common good. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's the challenge with all technologies. It can be used for positive purposes or negative purposes, and I think we have an opportunity to collectively see that AI, really is democratizing. It is based in a concept of equity, and creating as much equal or equitable advantage as we can
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
to break down barriers to learning, either in a given space or institution or across spaces, across time. And AI has all those attributes that can allow us to do that. But
Mm-hmm.
we also know we need to guard against the problems that can arise, right?
Exactly.
The inequalities, the biases, those who would use it for, I guess, nefarious purposes in terms of fake pictures and stuff like that. So, but with all technologies, that's life, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you're going to have good human intentions and you're going to have bad human intentions,
Exactly.
and so there's no use fighting against AI. Fight against the bad uses of AI. That's what I
Exactly.
would encourage
Yeah.
you to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what you said, thank you. What you said reminded me of like a very quick question. So, are there already AI governance bodies at higher education, like state level or country level? You know, let's say in the healthcare system, we have this AI governance, and they exactly look for all these issues. And so, if you don't mind saying a few words about it, that would
There's
be
all
great.
kinds of AI governance that's cropping up around the world. I wrote a paper not that long ago on AI governance. It's on my LinkedIn page, and
Okay.
it talks about what's going on in California with AI and throughout the US, but also throughout Europe, and in Canada. And our college, for example, we developed an AI ethics framework. We had an AI task force. And so AI must adhere to the AI ethics framework that we have in the college. So there's different levels of law, right? There's national law, there's subnational law, and then there's particular laws or conventions or understandings or guidance that would occur within various kinds of institutions. And so I know that a lot of institutions of higher learning have developed their own
Yes.
guiding principles.
Mhm.
And most of those will look a lot alike in terms of the core ethical issues, but then they will deviate based on what at the time they thought they were going to do with it. But
Yeah.
of course, that's going to change, right? It's going to
Mhm,
change a
mhm.
lot because as the technology changes, use cases will change.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Dr. Conway, thank you so much for your time, for your expertise and wisdom that you shared with us today. But
My
more
pleasure.
importantly, the work that you're doing, and I see that you actually came a long way and already implemented a lot of things in your own space and also encouraging others. So thank you for your work in AI in higher education too. So yeah, we look forward to our viewers learning from your experience and knowledge as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ali. Thank you for the invite. It's very, very nice to meet you.